Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math in comics 2, where the focus is going to be on sequels, reboots, and solo series. There's so much that you can say about the world of comics. It's a very nuanced medium, and there's a lot of math in it. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the general ways that math is used in comics, and then talk about the sequels, the reboots, the solo series, and go from there. And I have some other videos planned on math and comics. And with that in mind, I'll leave a link to the original video in the description. And if I do enough of these, I'll make a playlist and leave the link in the description to each of the videos as well. So yeah, let's get into it. So with comics, like I said, they're inherently mathematical, and that may not be, obvious at first. But in addition to just like math being used in a lot of the science in comics, and some storylines that involve something very mathematical, i.e., the anti-life equation or the speed formula, there's math all over the place. When I think about comics, you have these stories that are spread out. They have a certain length to them, right? They have a certain deadline to meet to get them out. And there's math in all that. There's math in how much they cost as well. There's math in how, people and objects are drawn. There's math in how, sequences come out, right? Because, you're going page to page, panel to panel, and there's math in all of that. Comics is also known as sequential art, and it's very mathematical by its very nature as a result. And so when I think about how a story is being told in the unique way that comics do, I can't help but think that one, stories are mathematical in their very nature and structure, and I feel like when you're seeing how things shape up in a comic, there's a lot of math in that, and there's a lot of wiggle room to play. There's also math in how things are colored, how they're inked, and what's happening in a story in general, really, because honestly, right, each and every story and character is going to have to deal not only with the writer and the artist and anchor and so on and so forth, but they have to deal with editors. They have to deal with the company as a whole. That affects how you tell a story, and there's math in that too. And so when I think about sequels and reboots and solo series, all those I think are a direct result of how comics are doing out there, and I think that's fascinating because there's a lot of math in that too. Let's start with sequels. So, like I said, comics are also known as sequential art, and I think that's very appropriate, not just because of the story that you're telling panel to panel, but because of how it ends up flowing over time, right? Like you end up having these characters that stick around for a while, and you have continuity that gets built, and so you can kind of think of each issue is a sequel to the previous one, and each storyline a sequel to the previous one, and there's math and all that and how it flows and functions. And I think that's pretty cool. And then you could have sequels to big events or crossovers, and I can get into those things a little bit more in another video. But the idea is when I'm thinking of those, I'm thinking one, maybe someone does have a legitimate story they want to tell, but a lot of the times crossovers or big money, event comics in general are big money. And if you're wondering, I view crossovers as a special type of event where events don't necessarily need to be crossovers, if that makes sense. So that's how I look at things, and there's the math in all of that. And they've been shown to make some serious cash, right? Not only are you talking about people who are buying issues, but you're buying merchandising, right? You might be buying clothes, toys, anything like that, tied to certain events. And I want to get into that a little bit more in the event comics videos that I tend to make about math in comics. But I think one thing worth mentioning is something like Secret Wars. Secret Wars, if I'm not mistaken, the whole point was to sell toys, and we ended up getting a legendary story as a result, because they could have made it anything, but they ended up going the route of making it pretty cool. And there's a lot of math in how that functioned. And Secret Wars itself ended up having more than one sequel. That name, it says a lot, right? So they had like Secret Wars 2, and then they had like Secret Wars 3, which was done in Fantastic Four, like for 2 issues, and then they had like the modern Secret Wars back in like 2015, and that was kind of crazy, and that kind of gets into reboot territory. So I think that's a good pivot because like for a long time, Marvel, they didn't do hardcore reboots per se. They did soft reboots. But and I think that's interesting because there's a lot of math and why that happens. Sometimes it's like money because they want to do something new without straying too far from the past. But the other thing is a character's origin might be outdated, like Iron Man, for instance. I think the war he was fighting in when he was introduced was the Vietnam War, which if you jump ahead like several decades, that isn't going to work. They don't want to age their characters like that. So what do? They have a sliding time scale, and there's math in that. And so when you're looking at comics, you have these characters that have been going on for years and years and years, with people like Superman, for instance, being nearly 100 years old at this point, or at least getting close to it. Little over 80 for Superman. Um, but the point is, like, there's these long time spans, and there's implications that come with numbers like that, right? There's implications that come with the amount of years a character has been around, and they can't have a character age in real time because they don't want to kill like the potential storytelling of that character that everyone knows. Although I do like characters that age, stories that show aging. It makes more sense to me. I think it's interesting, but from a business standpoint, they want to do things that keep them young. So you have to have things like a sliding time scale, and you have to have things like reboot. You could have something like Secret Wars, which rebooted pretty much the entire Marvel universe and condensed a lot of the multiverse down a bit. Or you could do like DC does, in where they do hardcore reboots pretty often. But you could also have pretty quiet reboots, soft reboots, like the one that I mentioned involving a sliding time scale. And there's math in all of that, and how it works, and how it functions, and how it's being told in the story. Because you have these editorial decisions, and how you tell a story with that may vary. You may get an issue and maybe like a small segment to make this change, or you might get several issues. And when you're talking about the bigger storylines, you might have issues that tie in with like other sorry, you may have tie-ins with like other comics across the board. It gets pretty crazy. It gets pretty wild, and you could also have sequels that are numbered in workout. I'm jumping around a little bit. But you might have like reboots that are big or small, but either way you cut it. There's math and how like that works from behind the scenes and also in story. And so we talked about sequels a bit, we talked about reboots a bit. So what about solo series? You might have a team like the X-Men, for instance, and you might notice some popular characters. You might want to flesh them out, but you have to start asking yourself some questions. It's like, is this character really, really popular? Is this character going to most likely make money, or what do we do? And so you might make a solo series. And when you do that, you have to consider a lot of things, right? Because you might have a set amount of issues that you want to do, and you might want to tell a specific story. So you have to map all that with the story, and there's math and how you're mapping all of that out, right? Because you might be like, okay, well, I'm going to have a certain amount of issues, certain amount of pages per issue. I'm going to have this happen in this story, and this happen in this story, and I'm going to have it happen in different segments. I'm going to have this number of panels per issue to tell this story, and you can have all that mapped out in advance. And then you're still going to have that approved by your editor at the end of the day. And I imagine in that position they're going to be making all sorts of different decisions based on how much money they can make, and there's a lot of math in that and how it affects you. And so I think all of that is interesting, and with a solo series and how it ends up surviving, yeah, money is involved there too, right? You might have a character like Wolverine, for instance, that is really popular and has had solo series that have done really well, and so thus they continue. But you might have something like a character that they thought would do well but didn't, and they kind of stopped there. But it all gets very interesting. But I've talked a lot in this video. My whole point, though, is I think one of the main things is like there's a lot of math in comics in general and how story structure and how everything comes together because there's a lot of logistics. There's a lot of math in telling the story. There's a lot of math and drawing a story and getting everything to link up. There's a lot of math in making sequels and reboots and solo series. There's just so much that goes into all of that. And I'm actually going to do some more math and comic videos soon because there's just so much to say about math and comics, and it's wild. And the first video I did actually covered a lot, but you could always go a little deeper. So I want to do that a bit more because comics are on my brain right now. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you checked the first one if you haven't. And I hope you check out the other ones in the future, probably the near future. I feel like I'm on a roll right now, so let's keep on. See you in the next one.